Hello, everybody tuning in, our lovely listeners. Welcome to another episode of Theosophical Insights, the podcast of the World Federation of Young Theosophists, or otherwise known as WFYT. I'm your co-host, Clover from Singapore, and I'm co-hosting with Svyat from Russia. And today we have the honor of chatting with Pedro Oliveira, who has had a long and illustrious career in the Theosophical Society. He's a hardworking and very respected person who has greatly contributed to the TS and to the world.
Pedro is a longtime student and teacher of Theosophy, having joined the Theosophical Society in 1978. Over the decades, he has served the Society in various significant roles, including as the International Secretary at the TS headquarters in Adyar, President of the Indo-Pacific Federation, and Education Coordinator for the TS in Australia. He has lectured extensively around the world on topics such as perennial wisdom, mysticism, and comparative religion. His writings have been featured in numerous theosophical journals, and he is the author of several books, including An Sri Ram, A Life of Beneficence and Wisdom, CWL Speaks, Charles Leadbitter's correspondence concerning the 1906 crisis in the Theosophical Society, and Annie Besant in India. With his vast experience in theosophical education, research, and leadership, Pedro brings a wealth of knowledge that is especially valuable to young theosophists today. We're honored to have him with us to share his journey, insights, and wisdom. And dear Pedro, welcome to the podcast. Very glad to see you.
Great to see you. So, Pedro, you joined the Theosophical Society in 1978 in Brazil, right?
Yes.
What initially drew you to Theosophy and to the society, and how has your understanding evolved over the years?
Yes. I studied in my high school years at a military school. At that time, Brazil was under a military dictatorship. So the military decided to remove philosophy from all public schools because they considered that philosophy was a subversive activity. But they kept philosophy in the military schools. So I was benefited by that. And I had a teacher who was a very eclectic man, and he taught us about Plato, Giordano Bruno, and Henri Bergson, the French philosopher who emphasized intuition and so on. And towards the end of 1973, he made us to study in the classroom a book by a book called Jonathan Livingstone Seagull. Probably this book is too old for you to know about it. And by Richard Bach. And I was very interested in the teachings of that book that describes a seagull that is not interested in doing what normally seagulls do. That means search for food, you know. And so I couldn't really understand. So it's a custom in Brazil that after the school year ends and the Christmas festivities end, families go to the beach to enjoy summer. And I went with my family and some of my cousins, and we had an agreement. Um, we had an agreement that each one of us would in turn go to the news agency to buy comic magazines, you know, like Superman and the Iron Man and things like that. So when it was my turn, I went there, but I saw a magazine depicting a Swami from India with his hands folded. So I had a look at it, and then I decided to buy. And there was some articles about yoga, and there was a reproduction of one of the latest, one chapter of one of the latest books by Krishnamurti. I couldn't understand that. I was 17 years old. I was more interested in soccer, swimming, and food. So, but I said to myself, when we go back to the city at the end of February, I'm going to the best bookshop in town and buy a book about these subjects. So I went there, very good bookshop. I went to the section of religion and philosophy, and I examined a number of books, and I said to myself, I am going to buy this book. And the book that I pulled from the shelf was called At the Feet of the Master.
Mm.
And soon after that, I became a vegetarian to the torment of my parents. But I resisted. And I met the TS a few years later.
Mm.
Very
So
interesting.
that
Very
was my
interesting.
introduction to Theosophy. I met Theosophy before I met the TS.
That seems to be the case for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Well, for me, it's the opposite. I met Theosophy through TS. I guess it's one way or the other,
Yes, yes.
but we're all led there. But it's very interesting to get to know your story.
The Seagull Jonathan Livingston is a magnificent and beautiful book, and I think everyone should read it. And I only recently learned that there is a last chapter recently, more or less recently published, that not everybody knows that he was thinking, published or not. It's an amazing book. And I can certainly relate to your vegetarian experience because it was a challenge for my parents also when I stopped eating meat. And it's mysterious how we get attracted to some books, but not to the others in a natural, spontaneous way, and it shapes our life in future, right? For some
That's true.
reason. Yeah. And I would like to ask you about your experience with the World Federation of Young Theosophists. Were you a part of it in the early years or no? And
Yes,
what was the
yes.
experience?
I was part of the Arjuna study group in my hometown in Porto Alegre, and we had a number of activities. We did some camping and sightseeing, a lot of study as well. So it's a very nice group. But I was a bit divided, you know. I don't have cancer in my horoscope, but some people say that cancer, a friend of mine in Brazil, you may have known him, Ricardo Lindemann, he's a very good astrologer. The cancer sign represents the crab. A crab never is able to run forward. He has to move sideways, you know, which denotes a certain hesitancy. So I felt a bit divided because I was loyal. I was active in the youth group, but I was a member of the lodge, and there were sometimes some differences of opinion that they were not very, let us say, polite. It's part of the Brazilian psyche, you know. But we did a lot of work. I actually joined the TS through a gathering of young people, congregating members from Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina. And there was a lot of argument during that gathering, but I was feeling quite happy because I had found some like-minded people there, and I had been a member of other groups, you know, like Bridge to Freedom, that promotes the knowledge of the ascended masters and so on. Um, And some of the the young people were very amused because in my Volkswagen that I had at that time, I had a sticker of Master Saint Germain, and for some of them that was a bit too far. The sticker didn't last long after I joined the TS. I had some changes of thinking, but the federation was very active at that time, and did a lot of good work. It was active in a number of countries, and I discovered that one of the greatest impulses for the Federation of Young Theosophists at that time, or before that time, was a former president of the TS called John Coates. He was a very tall man, 6'4", and I met him once in my hometown. We took him to a Chinese restaurant and we talked about theosophy and so on. At that time, the differences of opinion had started to affect me to some extent. So I asked him, Mr. President, why there are so many disagreements within the Theosophical Society? He said, it is because the Theosophical Society is not a society of sheeps. How do you say sheep in Russian?
Овца.
Yes. In Chinese?
Yang.
Yes. In Portuguese is ovelha. So this is used as a kind of an adjective. If you call somebody an ovelha in Brazil, that means that person follows others without thinking, right?
Mm.
So we had this evening with him. I was a member of this youth group. I had attended a number of youth gatherings in Brazil. Once in February 1979, I attended a gathering on an island in Bahia. And that was the first time I met Brazilian theosophists like Marcos Rezende, Ulysses Rezende, Isis Rezende, and some members from the Northeast as well. I don't know how I could manage finding fun to fly to Salvador in Bahia. Anyhow, I managed. So the work of the young people was important in my formative years in the TS. Then gradually, I undertook more responsibilities with the lodge, and my connection with the youth group became thinner.
Why was that?
Huh?
Why was it that your connection?
Well, basically because the lodge needed my help. There were a number of young people in the group, but there are not many people willing to take responsibility, you know. And this is what it was, a natural process. But I mentioned to someone recently that most of the young people who are in positions of leadership in Brazil, in the Brazilian section, they came from the youth movement. So the youth movement really affected them in a very positive way.
So, well, in the past, you were saying among the youths in the youth group, not many people were willing to commit so much to the society or the responsibilities.
I didn't say that. I said that there were quite a number of members in the youth group, but the lodge didn't have as many members. So I felt responsible to help the lodge, and gradually I became more absorbed. the youth group continued with its work, and they had quite a number of very people of great understanding,
Mm.
and some of them carried on the work of the World Federation. At that time, it was called the World Theosophical Youth Federation, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's slightly different, but I think it doesn't matter. Many people are happy to see that the Federation of Young Theosophists has reincarnated.
Mm. Yeah, and I'm very happy to be among everyone in the WFYT and to be able to be part of a project like this as well.
Me too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, speaking of young people in the society and those who are interested in spirituality in general, there are many who are interested in spirituality but may not be aware of theosophy. So, but how do you think theosophy can remain relevant to younger generations?
That's a big question. How much time do you have? um, this was a question that arose in the dialogue with the president at the last convention. How can the society become relevant and attract more members and so on?
Mhm.
Um, um, it was not very difficult for me to join the society. What I didn't tell you is that although I was a part of a number, I had gone through a number of groups. I had become disappointed with some groups, and because there was no inquiry, no investigation, no emphasis to study. One of the groups I used to attend, they would give us a leaflet or a booklet, and we would read that, and then there was a little speech, Nice people, but my background is philosophy. I have a degree in philosophy, so investigation, inquiry is important. I remember also in Sydney some years ago when I was working as education coordinator. Uh, um, I met a young man on the street, and he asked me, "What do you do?" And I said, "I work for the Theosophical Society." And his question was, "What is that?"
Mhm.
Yeah. Because some people think that the name Theosophical means theology, or that we are a Mormon, a new Mormon church or a theological organization. I said, no, we are not a theological organization. I said, for example, the motto of the Theosophical Society is, there is no religion higher than truth. He said, I agree with that. He had never heard about the TS or Theosophy, but he immediately resonated to the motto of the society, you see, which is a great motto. And I have written some articles about this. The motto of the society came about because Colonel Olcott and Madame Blavatsky were on a tour of North India in 1880. And they were invited to visit the Maharaja of Benares. Benares is a very sacred city for Indians, not only because of the Ganges, but also because of the temples and so on. And the Maharaja of Benares was so impressed with the work that HPB and Colonel Olcott were doing. And he said, here it is, you can take it. This is my family motto. You can use it. This family motto has been with my family for 300 years. And the family motto was Satyam Nasti Paro Dharma. There is no religion higher than truth. And of course, HPB almost immediately adopted it for the Theosophists. I discovered the very first issue where she published the motto, and then that became the motto of the society. And that's like a keynote. You know, if there is no religion higher than truth, that means we have to investigate truth. In order to investigate truth, we need several things. First, an open mind. Second, the capacity to listen. I have, during my studies, discovered passages that said that when you have a profound text like the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads or Light on the Path or Voice of the Silence, yes, you can read it, but you need to understand that before trying to get any knowledge out of it, you need to listen to what the text is saying. In Sanskrit, this is called Shravana, listening. And in order to listen, you have to prepare yourself. You cannot listen with the prejudices, you know. So I think the society has still a great work to do if, among other things, its motto is understood. For example, and I think young people would be interested in this. I say I think because I'm now an old man, you know, I am a retired person. Probably for next Christmas, the only present that I will ask is a cane, an old man's cane to help me to walk. So we need this capacity to listen. The wisdom of the founders, and am I talking too much? Are you bored?
No.
We're listening.
Yes. When the society was formed in New York, it was actually formed in October 1875. It was inaugurated in 1875, November, but it was formed. The minutes of the formation are October 1875. When they created the rules of the society, the constitution, the founders created a preamble. What is a preamble? It's something that occurs at the beginning of a document. The American Constitution has a preamble. Every important documents have a preamble. And I discovered in this preamble this statement: the Theosophical Society has no creed to disseminate or promote. Can you imagine this? We are members of a society that has no official creed. I know some members will disagree because they say, no, but Theosophy is part of our work. Fine. But the society has maintained a complete independence as an organization from any teaching. It does not subscribe any teaching officially, but it encourages its members to study. So nowadays, now if you have a young person as your friend, you could say, if there is any question about the society, you could say, the Theosophical Society is an organization without a creed. And what does it mean? It encourages investigation, inquiry, listening. You know? Sometimes this doesn't work with some members because they are convinced that the society does have a teaching, but the official documents say otherwise.
Maybe because to different people, Theosophy means something different.
Yes.
And I guess part of that, part of what the preamble has to say that Theosophy has no particular creed kind of also entails that people will each pick something different, will each interpret something different out of their own studies. So,
Yes.
I think that this lack of lack of finality or lack of conclusive definition of what is Theosophy is a motivating factor that always pushes to try to understand again and again and again, more and more and more.
That's true. I am always trying to study and to investigate, and for the past 2 years I discovered the teachings of a great Buddhist philosopher called Nagarjuna. The story is this: when the Buddha died or passed away, after some centuries, some monks started creating certain teachings and saying, this is the teaching of the Buddha. Others would say, no, this is the teaching of the Buddha. It became like a schismatic movement with schisms, you know. So then Nagarjuna comes into the picture, and the Dalai Lama said that he completely reformed Buddhism. He reoriented the teaching to the basics, to the original. Why? By giving a lot of importance to emptiness, shunyata. But also because he wrote a very important work, very difficult to read, you know. It is a book about the middle way. The truth is that in the middle way. It's not on the extremes, you know. And then towards the end of his text, he said this, which is very difficult to accept for when we are identified with our own opinions. But this is what he said. Are you ready? He said, all views are empty. All opinions are empty. Because he suggests that they don't represent the totality of truth. Why? And he said that the Buddha taught him this. He went into the teaching of the Buddha very deeply. So I started to look into the Buddhist tradition. Where can I find this passage about this, all views are empty? And I found it. The Buddha was somewhere, and with him was one of his favorite disciples, Ananda, right? And there was a sannyasi called Vachagota who wanted to ask questions to the Buddha. He was described as a wanderer, someone who has no family, and he abandoned his name, and he's a sannyasi, he's a renunciant. So he asked to see the Buddha, and he was invited to sit in front of him, and he said to the Buddha, is there a permanent self in man? The Buddha was silent. Then he said, is there not a permanent self in man? The Buddha was silent. Then Vachagota left. He was not getting any reply from the Buddha. But when a Buddha behaves that way, there must be a reason, you know. So after Vachagota left, Ananda asked him, and he uses an expression Tathagata, which means he who follows on the footsteps of his predecessors. It's a title of the Buddha, Tathagata.
Mm.
And Ananda said, why did the Tathagata remain silent before the questions of Vachagota? The Buddha said, Anand, listen. Now, when a person like the Buddha says, listen, you have to listen because he's going to say something very important. And then the Buddha said, listen, if the Tathagata had said yes to the first question, a new school of thought would be formed. The eternalists, there is a self in man. If the Buddha had said yes to the second question, a new school of thought would be formed. The nihilists, there is no self in man, there is nothing. And then again, the Buddha said, Anand, listen. So if he says that, he said that to Ananda twice. Ananda, listen, he said, the Tathagata has no views. The Tathagata, the Buddha, has no opinions. Somebody who has seen truth in its entirety doesn't need an opinion. And what happens when you cling to an opinion? You divide yourself from others. You cause division. Anyhow, I thought about this, and I'm still researching, but I have a theory, a small theory, that the resolution of freedom of thought, which is very important to the TS, may have to do with these old traditions that emphasize that opinions are not the truth. So in the TS, we have every right to express our opinion, but the resolution of the General Council says we have every right to express our opinion within the limits of courtesy and consideration. Because the moment you attack someone, you are hurting the principle of freedom of thought. You know, we don't need to attack anybody. So I think these points would be of interest to young people today. A society that there is no creed, a society that encourages investigation of religion, philosophy, and science. They are very vast fields. But a society that encourages its members to listen, including listening to each other. It would be very difficult to attract young people if they came to the TS and somebody would tell them, you have to accept the astral plane, the mental plane, the chakras, and so on. And I always say this, when we joined this society, the only thing we were asked is, are you in sympathy with the three objects? We don't ask people what kind of religious background they have, intellectual background they have, what kind of meditative practice they do. That's not our business. Their business, those who want to join, they need to be in sympathy with the three objects because the objects have been building the society since the beginning. You must be very tired.
Oh no. That's very interesting to listen to you. Thank you for sharing that. Very good. I just wanted to mention that that's exactly how my father reacted to the motto when I told him. He said it's a very good motto. And he was a scientist in materialistic line and a professor, and his reaction was just the same. Very good motto. So many people sympathize with that.
Yes.
I would like to ask you, what in your view is to be a Theosophist?
when I was your age, probably younger than you, because I joined the society when I was 21,
Mhm.
which means at that time I would qualify to be a member of the Federation of the Young Theosophists. Um, uh, and I tried to read as many books as I could, and to form a view of what Theosophy is. And then I came to this book, which I don't think it should be given to a newcomer into the TS. It would be a bit scary to give it to a newcomer. I'm talking about the book Practical Occultism. It presents some rules of behavior that are required from chelas in Tibet. It's not necessarily our way of life here. For example, you cannot touch a pet, you cannot have a pet. Streaming TV is out of the question. Of course, that was not the case in Tibet.
Not a problem there.
No, but and then in another chapter, Madame Blavatsky said it's very easy to be a theosophist. And then she said, anybody with average intellectual capacity who is interested in helping others rather than receive help, and who values truth, wisdom, and altruism in their own right, not from what they can obtain from them, is a theosophist. But then in the next paragraph, she said, but it is much more demanding if you want to follow that path of occultism, because she said it involves the complete renunciation of self. This is similar to what Nagarjuna taught, all views are empty. If a person realizes that, there is no problem.
Yeah.
One of the great opportunities I had in this life was to attend the seminars on human regeneration with Radha Bournier in Naarden. You have been to Naarden, I'm sure. That was in July 1990. Where were you in July 1990?
1 year later, I'll be born. No, half a year later, I'll be born.
So you were not an incarnation yet?
Probably in preparation. The devas
Preparation.
were working on it.
Very good. So I was there, and
Oh.
Radha Bournier had this capacity to go deep into these subjects. And she said, if we consider the first object of the TS, the first object, universal brotherhood without distinction, represents a mind without barriers. Nagarjuna again, you see. Universal brotherhood without distinction represents a mind without barriers. All the barriers have ceased to exist if you really understand what brotherhood is. And I don't need to remind you that this is a quality much needed in the world today. She said that it's a mind without barriers. It's a mind without conditioning. It is a mind without self-interest. It is a mind without disharmony. It is one could call it a learning mind. So these things, I think, these things are important for the work of the TS.
Yeah, and I feel like based on what you've just said, the very nature of Theosophy and the TS and what it means to be a Theosophist somehow are kind of rooted in paradox. And I feel like, so it's like views versus no views, are a strict life versus no, versus just that there is no need for adhering to too many rules. You just need certain very human qualities in order to be a theosophist. For example, I feel like theosophy for me kind of is saying that we are transcending paradoxes, and it's in transcending these paradoxes that it can be confusing for some people at first, maybe for youths or anybody, because they'll be like, huh, or theosophy says that it doesn't subscribe to any doctrine or creed, but it seems to be quite it seems to have a lot of rules and stuff. Yeah. But I really feel like the essence of it is in the transcendence of these paradoxes.
Yes.
So I think it's beautiful whenever we discuss theosophy or any of these high spiritual truths, as the deeper we go, the simpler they become, but at the same time more paradoxical and trying to go beyond the paradox. Right?
There is an author that I think he made an enormous influence on the TS. I'm talking about N. Sri Ram.
You wrote a book about
I
him.
had the great opportunity. I see I have had a number of opportunities in this life, and
You got to know him personally?
trying to learn which is important. So I put together a small biography of his with the help of Radha Burneer when she was president. And he was, some of his family men said that he was already born with this kind of inner renunciation, and and which means he may have attained this capacity to ponder very deeply, to listen very deeply, and he to me was the great teacher of conflict resolution in the TS. I'm sure in your work for the TS you have never experienced conflict, right?
Of course not. No. We live in heaven, of course. Angels, only angels work in TS.
Yes, there is this story that I came to know, which is quite incredible. He was a young man. He already had a young family, and Ibesan was very involved in political activity for the independence of India. So she asked him to be the assistant editor of her newspaper, New India. She had bought a newspaper and she renamed it New India about 1916 or so. And he was there, and he working hard and very capable as a writer. But there were other volunteers there. Some of them were well off. They have cars. Sri Ram didn't have a car. And there was this volunteer who had a car with a driver. And he said to Sri Ram, if you report to the main gate of the TS at 8 a.m., I'll give you a lift to the office of the newspaper. But this man was very irritable. How do you say irritable in Chinese?
Irritable?
Irritable. Irritates easily.
Sorry, irritable?
Yes.
Irritable.
Oh.
It doesn't matter.
I think Seth has better Chinese, knows better Chinese.
Yes. Svyatoslav, how do you say irritable in
容易
French?
生气，容易生气，火气大。
Wow.
Does Seth
Sounds
know
beautiful.
Chinese?
Irritable.
Sounds beautiful.
Yeah. Anyhow, so this man would arrive in his car before 8 o'clock. He could see Sri Ram coming on the main road at Adyar. And if in his wristwatch was 8:30, he would take off and cause Sri Ram to walk for 2.5 hours. or 2 hours. There were no taxis in those days. And whenever Sri Ram arrived in the office of New India, this man would bully him. I'm not going to ask the meaning of bully in Chinese and Russian because it's the same, you know. Um, so this man would bully him and said, "You don't do anything right," and he really demeaned Sri Ram.
Mm.
And Sri Ram would never react. And that went on for several years. Just imagine you have to work with a person like that.
Wow.
And after some time, somebody came to Sri Ram and said, "Do you remember that difficult man who worked in the..." But by this time, Sri Ram was international president of the TS. "Do you remember this man who used to bully you at the office of New India and so on?" Sri Ram said, "Ah, yes, I remember him." "Well, this man is living alone in some part of India. Apparently his family is not with him anymore." And do you know what Sri Ram did? He wrote this man a letter saying, "Why don't you come to Adyar? There is a place for you here."
Mm.
And Radhaji, who knew well the story and the people involved, she said, "This is one of the great ways of helping people to change."
Through love and
Yeah, yeah.
acceptance.
She also said she made a study of Othello, the Moor of Venice, Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell
You know, Othello had anger
him.
management problems, and he was convinced that his wife was betraying him, which was not true. And he was convinced, and he would shout
Delusional.
at her. And another character, which I think it's an extension of Othello's psyche, it's called Iago. And he said, "Yes, she is betraying you. You have to believe, you have to do something about this." It was a tragedy because in the end she dies. But Radhaji, in one of her articles, she said, when a person like Othello was shouting and cursing and uh, doing things of this nature, swearing perhaps, she said, when such people do this, it's like a cry for help.
Mm.
They are saying, "I'm lost, help me."
Yeah.
And you see, this has an enormous importance for the work of the TS, which means every theosophist should give an example to the extent that they can.
Yes.
And there is another episode with Sri Ram. There is at Adyar a cooperative of workers that help workers when they need with medical exams or other things. They contribute a little of the salary to the cooperative. The TS gives the bulk of it.
Mm-hmm.
And this man had applied for a loan from the cooperative, but it was taking too long for the loan to be given, and he got really angry. So he knew that Sri Ram's car would come to the headquarters hall at 8 o'clock. He waited for him there. When Sri Ram left his car and started walking towards the steps to go to the president's office, he abused him in Tamil, which Sri Ram knew. He abused him horribly. When he started abusing Sri Ram stopped and paid attention to him. Eventually, he got tired and he left. So Sri Ram went to the office. In the afternoon, his secretary said, "The treasury has sent us a number of checks for you to sign, including for this man who abused you this morning. You are not going to sign this check, are you? Sri Ram said, Nagarjuna again. What did he say? In a few hours, all those words were not in his mind anymore. He was living in the real present. And his writings reflect that.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Theosophical Insights. It's so captivating listening to Pedro share his experiences and wisdom through storytelling and humor. Stay tuned for part 2. Like and subscribe for more beautiful theosophical conversations. We're available on all streaming platforms as well as on YouTube. You can also visit the website of the WFYT, the World Federation of Young Theosophists, to find out more about our podcast and other projects we do to spread love and light. Till next time.